You at least got to enjoy the video a little bit and see the amazing ministry that this church provides to so many beautiful and wonderful children. And what a great and amazing experience it is to be a part of it for the first time for me. I was just amazed at all the creativity, all the love, and all the participation. I taught senior high, which was an education for me more than them. I think I struggled to be prepared every week and to meet their needs, although they were wonderful. And in fact, they have a skill that I do not possess. They know how to run every DVD player in this building. So I'm only going to teach classes with kids who know how to do that because I haven't quite figured it out yet. When I was a kid, I had a lot of great experiences in church and a lot of great experiences growing up with my family. And I even have a biblical name, but not Robert. Another one, my middle name. But when I was a kid, I hated it. I hated my middle name. I hated it so much I can't tell you. It's my dad's middle name. I'm a junior. It was my granddad's middle name. And it was just one of those things that was bizarre and weird, you know. And when you're a kid, you don't want anything that sets you apart from other people. At least I didn't. I'd like to just blend into the crowd when I was a young guy. And my parents would try to explain it to me, and I didn't want to hear anything about it. I didn't want to hear where the name came from or what it was about. I was just so embarrassed. In fact, in school, when they would give you a form to fill out and you were supposed to put your full name in it, I would just say that I didn't have a middle name. I would tell the teacher or the school counselor or whatever that because I was so embarrassed by it. My family pronounces it Elhanan. It can be pronounced a couple of different ways. It's a family name that's been passed down, traces a little bit to a Jewish ancestor, and I just hid that. You know, I never, even when I went to seminary and studied Hebrew, I didn't want to know anything about it. It was just one of those weird things that some kids grow up with. We were in Israel for the very first time, and we went to a place that's called the Shrine of the Book. It's at the Israeli Museum, which is the most amazing museum, I think, on planet Earth. I mean, if you want to see the skeletal remains of somebody who's been crucified, they have it with the nails in the skeleton and stuff like that. If you want to see, Canaanite tombs, they have all kinds of things. But the most interesting thing, I think, is the Shroud of the Word. And that contains the scrolls that were found that we know as the Dead Sea Scrolls. The room that they're kept in is almost just twilight because they can't have direct light on them or it'll destroy them. And they changed the manuscript that are in display. You can see there, it looks kind of like the end of a scroll. Those are some of the actual pages of the Dead Sea Scroll, our oldest text, copies of the Bible, the Old Testament. And they change them all the time because they don't want them ever exposed to too much light. So the first time we were there, we went into the Shroud of the Book. And this weird thing had been happening ever since I got to Israel. I mean, when I went to Israel and I went in to go through customs, the guy says to me, "Welcome back, we're glad you're here." And I'm thinking, I've never been here before. And Jewish people are very, very hospitable, and in Israel in particular, and particularly in Jerusalem, they really are. But people kept acting like I was a native. And, I'm 6'2", I'm Irish and English, and I don't really look Jewish, by any stretch of the imagination, but people keep treating me that way. So we go to the Shroud of the Book, and my guide says, "Come here, I want to show you something." And he takes me up to one of the scrolls there that's, hundreds and hundreds of years old, before the time of Christ. And he goes up here, and he points out, and I know enough Hebrew that I can kind of see what he's saying. I know what this is. He goes, "That's your name." And the oldest text, the oldest copy of the Bible, El, as they would say it in Hebrew, Elhanan. My middle name, Robert Elhanan Gorrell. And it's this text from 1 Samuel. And scholars have debated over the years because there are two stories in the Bible about Goliath, right? There's one where David kills Goliath, and there's one where Elhanan kills Goliath. And that's called all kinds of debates and things among Christian scholars. And so I asked my Jewish friends about it, and they go, "Well, just ask a Jew. We all know what that's about." And all the Jewish scholars know it, and the Jewish people know it's part of their culture. David is the royal name. Elhanan is the family name. Just like my parents call me Junior, which you may not use, unless you adopt me. Then you could use it, you know. Elhanan was his family. That's what his mom and dad would call him. That's what his brothers and sisters would call him. David was his royal name, you know, like a pope gets a new name, that kind of a thing. So that was his royal name. But Elhanan was the family name. That was the name that the people who were close to him and in his intimate circle knew him by. And then the guide said to me, you know what it means, right? I was kind of embarrassed because, you know, I'd been a Hebrew major, and I looked at the floor and I said, no, not really. And he said, El, you know what that means? Yes, God. Hanan, I didn't know what it meant, is gracious. God is gracious, or God offers grace. And then I understood what my parents have been trying to tell me for many, many, many years. They had wrapped up in that name and had given it to me, a family name, a name of heritage, but also a name that encompassed everything they believed in one word. They had named me with their most precious belief, that God is gracious. They had made me a child of promise. It just took me a while to figure it out. Now, when you're a child of promise, that claims both your heritage and it propels you into the future. To live as a child of promise is to live with a faith confidence that you are called to serve God in a powerful and transformative way. And every child needs to know they are a child of promise. Every child needs to know that. Every child needs to know that they were prayed for and desired and wanted and that they matter. You'll probably hear me quote this over and over again, but Harvard did a great study in which they found out that the more significant adults a child can name in their life, the more likely they are to graduate from college. I say this, look at our two teachers here. Children who can name 6 significant adults in their life, almost 98% of them graduate from college. Children who can only name 1 significant adult in their life, almost 80% of them don't graduate from high school. Children need that claiming, that affirmation, that saying to them, speaking into their life, as my parents did to me, as my grandparents did to me, that you matter, you're special, you're important. You have something important to contribute to this world. I was so blessed to grow up with a home like that. I stuttered as a kid. My grandma set me down in a chair and made me watch President Kennedy give speeches, and she said, you're going to be able to do that someday. I didn't believe her, but she loaned that faith to me till I could live into it. We have to give children a vision for what they can be and what they can do. That's the kind of child David was. The story of David is the story of a boy who was raised to live out promise. He was a child of promise, which was very important because he had to face some really bad guys called the Philistines. We're going to be on this series, Life Lessons, where we're going to learn the basic things you need in life. We're starting out today with children. We're going to go through various lessons from David's life. And David grew up for a purpose. And that purpose was to face this incredible enemy that threatened to snuff out his nation called the Philistines. Now that's a word that's familiar to us. There's a part of that lives right now in our culture. Philistinia in Latin, Palestinia. The word Palestine comes from the Philistines. They were probably Phoenician. We know that their art was Greek. They sailed all over the Mediterranean. They were the Vikings of the ancient world. They went all over the place and raided and dominated and stole culture and implemented their own culture. They settled there along the coast of Israel in 5 great cities. Goliath was from one of them called Gath. They settled always on the coast. They always lived where they could see and return to the sea. They were big partiers. They were known in the ancient world for one thing in particular. Besides being great fighters, they were known for one other thing. They were the world's greatest beer drinkers. In fact, if you stopped a Philistine army anywhere and checked their canteens, every man's canteen would be full of beer, not water. They created a whole system for filtering barley. That's their greatest technological achievement they shared with the world, is they found a way to really filter barley and get great beer. So they like to drink beer and they like to fight, and apparently they were really, really, really big. When you read the story here and you get the various measurements, I know that's hard to translate, but think about like a Shaq O'Neal, okay, a Shaquille O'Neal kind of person. If you don't know who he is, just watch some of the NBA playoffs. You'll see him talking. And just compare him to the guys around him. The guys around him are all 6'8", 6'9", 6'7", and they look tiny compared to him. Just watch his hands when he's gigantic. And apparently some of the Philistines were like that too. The Philistines had come from the seacoast and they were marching on Jerusalem. And that route is very short, but it goes through a valley called the Valley of Elah. And if you go to the Valley of Elah today, there's not even a gas station there. You know, you go around here and see some little monuments and cutouts on the side of the road that tell you when big things happen. Took my wife to Cutthroat Gap a couple of weeks ago out west of the refuge. There's a monument there. You can see what happened there. It's not even anything like that in the Valley of Elah. Just some hills and a highway running through it. But if you know where to pull off on the road, you can find a creek with stones that maybe shepherd boys once used as they protected their flocks. Now, it's a classic situation. The Philistines come over, they get on top of one, they call it a mountain, it's like a hill. They get on top of one hill, the Israelite army comes up, they get on top of another hill, and they're faced off against each other. And neither army can come down, because if you come down low, you lose the strategic advantage over your enemy. So they're just stuck there. And so Goliath, this great champion of the beer-drinking Philistines, comes out in the middle of the valley and he starts to challenge the army of Israel. Send me your champion. We'll fight this thing. We'll settle it. And he even gets personal. He says, my God is better than your God. Your God's a coward. You won't even come out and fight. I'll wipe him out. I'll show you your God is nothing. And this goes on for 40 days and 40 nights. Now in the Bible, all numbers are significant. And there's a great symbiology in Hebrew. So when you hear 40, right, you think of Jesus being tempted 40 days, the ark, 40 days, 40 nights of rain. Israel wandered in the wilderness 40 years. 40 always represents a time of spiritual uncertainty, a time of spiritual conflict. A time when you read a story in the Bible with the word 40 in it, you're supposed to wonder, how is this going to turn out? Who's going to rise? Who's going to come up and be the hero in this thing? Who's going to solve this big spiritual problem? And it was a problem because none of the Israelite soldiers would come down and meet Goliath. They were terrified. That's when we're introduced to a character named David. David's the youngest of a whole bunch of brothers. My mom was the youngest of 13. I know what that's like. I've seen that. Everybody told her what to do, when to do it. Even when she was 70 years old, they were still telling her what to do and when to do it, right? That's kind of David's life. The elder boys have gone off to be soldiers. He stayed at home to be a shepherd, tend the flocks, but Daddy sends him out every now and then to carry food to his brothers at the front line. It's really interesting when you read the story, if you pay careful attention to it. David's father sends bread to his sons at the front line and cheese to the commanding officer. I mean, so much of being a parent, isn't it? You want the people who are there to influence your children to think great of them, to care about them, to have a feeling, a positive feeling about. He's saying to the commanding officer, take care of my kids. Watch over my boys. That's what it means to be a parent, right? And so David is on one of these jaunts where he's delivering food to the commanding officer and delivering food to his brothers. And he hears all this stuff that's going on. And he hears Goliath's words challenging not just the army of Israel, but God. And David is just this kid. And he says, who's going to go out and face this guy? And then everybody says, you can't do it. You're just a kid. You're just a little boy. And David gets really worked up. And finally he starts saying, somebody's got to do this. And the word goes back to King Saul, and Saul hears it, and he brings David in, and David starts to convince him that he has the faith, because that's what it's really about. This is a battle of faith. That he has the faith to march down into that valley. And I've stood there in that valley, and I've looked up at the hills, and I wouldn't want to think about being down there with guys all over the hills with spears and bows and arrows and stuff pointed at me. But eventually he convinces Saul. And Saul says, bring in my armor. And Saul's a big guy too, and David's a little kid. And he puts his armor on David, and David's like, I can't move. I can't even lift Saul's armor. How am I going to fight? He says, please, Saul, let me go fight like a shepherd. I've been out there, and I know what it's like to be a shepherd and to face a lion or to face a bear when you have nothing but a sling and a few stones. And I've done that, and I've been victorious. Just let me do it my way. And finally, Saul relents. And David steps down into the valley. I was at the Thunder game the other night, and I watched Russell Westbrook, who's one of the smaller guys out there. And the way he plays and the passion he has and the heart he has and the way he just attacks fearlessly. And at one point there was a guy who had the ball, and the guy was 7 foot, and he was getting ready to just lay it in the basket, and Russell jumps so high he blocks it. I think of David like that, full of confidence, ready to go, full of passion. As he walks out in that valley, and we know the outcome, right? He takes those stones and he flings them, and Goliath is slain. And David wins the day for his people and his God. In fact, it says that the Philistines just began to flee, and the Philistines did what they always did. They returned to the sea. And Israel was saved. Because David had been raised to believe that with God's help he could do anything. Now, there are three things I want to say about this story that I think are really important for us to understand. The first is to raise children of promise, to be a child of promise. Know and understand that it's what's on the inside that matters the most. It's what's on the inside that counts. Earlier in the story, in the 16th chapter of 1 Samuel, if you're a parent or grandparent, you might want to really look this up and share it with the children in your family, or share it with your friends that need to hear it. In 16, as Samuel is anointing David, here's little David, and he's got all these big brothers, they're soldiers and stuff. Here's little David, and Samuel is anointing him, and David's daddy says, why him? And Samuel, the great prophet, says, God is not like people. People look on the outer appearance and judge. But God sees the heart. God sees the heart. It's what's inside that matters. When my grandma set me down in front of the TV, she didn't know, she knew I stuttered, but she didn't see that as my future. She saw a whole different future for me. She built a passion inside of me to overcome that. In our hearts, that's where our future and our destiny is decided. In this culture where a person's reputation can be shattered and ruined in 5 minutes on the internet because of the way they look or something they did or didn't do at school, we have to build strong hearts in our children and grandchildren. They have to know it's what's inside that matters the most. David became a hero, not because he was the biggest or the strongest, but because he had the biggest and strongest heart. Secondly, the story teaches us that the children of promise use what they have. The easiest thing in the world is to look at your life and limit your future by what you don't have. To evaluate yourself and say, I can't do this, I can't do, I'm not that smart, I'm not wealthy enough, I haven't had this opportunity or that opportunity. Use what you have. David use what he had. He had a knowledge of being a shepherd. He knew how to defend the flock. He knew how to use a simple thing like a sling and a stone to face a great enemy. But more important than all of that, he used his faith. It wasn't the sling and the stone or his expertise at fighting bears and lions that carried him down to the valley that day. It was his trust in God. He used that simple foundational belief to lead him to his destiny and his fate. It's so important that we help children understand that they can use what they have to overcome obstacles and to become the men and women that God is calling them to be. It's not about what you don't have. It's about all that you do have. The third thing the story teaches us is to share our faith. We are called to be a people of faith. And we are called to pass that faith on generation to generation. David marched out in that field today carrying and surrounded and protected not by the armor of a king, but by the armor of his faith. A faith that had been bestowed upon him, taught to him by his parents and his grandparents and his community. The people of faith in his life had passed on to David their faith. And that was what equipped him to go out and do what he had to do for his nation and his people that day. The fate of his entire people came down to that young boy and his trust in the faith that he had received from the people of faith in his life, and that he would reveal by taking the steps he took into the valley of Elah. Every person you know, every child, every grandchild is going to face a valley of Elah in their life, probably many. Give them the thing they need most for when those moments come. Share with them your faith. One of my favorite stories is about a little girl who grew up in really hard conditions. She was, as she was described at the time, terribly crippled. She couldn't walk. She had older brothers and sisters. They would run outside and pray and play. And she would ask her parents, am I ever going to walk? Am I ever going to be able to go outside like my brothers and my sisters? And every night, her parents and her grandparents would come and they would place hands upon her and they would pray, not that she would be healed, but that the day when she was healed would come soon. Every single night, she heard that prayer from her parents and her grandparents. One day, with these huge braces on her legs, these terrible old things they used to use back in the old days, she was able to get up and walk a bit and to get around. Every night she would come home worn out and exhausted just from the struggle of taking a few steps, and her parents and her grandparents would come and place their hands on her and pray for her because they believed that God could do something amazing with her life, and they would say to her, you're going to be an amazing person. You're going to be incredible. God is going to bless you. And every day she got a little stronger. By the time she was 16, she was a champion in basketball. She was just blowing people away on the court. And then she went to the Olympics. I'd like to tell you, the first time she went, she was a huge success, but she wasn't. But the girl who couldn't walk now was in the Olympics. She went and she did win a bronze medal, but 4 years later, Wilma Rudolph won 3 gold medals in the Olympics. And when they asked her, how did you do it? How did you go from being this person who was in a bed and couldn't walk to being the champion of the world and running? She said, because of the faith that was shared with me by my parents and my grandparents who prayed me into running. I want you to think about the people in your life, children, grandchildren, people close to you, who maybe are facing that Elah Valley moment. And know that there are three things they need. They need to know that it's what's inside that matters the most. They need to know that they can use what they have. And they need to know that it's faith that will carry the day. This is the word of God in the name of the